This is episode 300 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing, president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. I am pleased to be joined this week by Charles Sullivan. Charles, welcome back to Tipping Point, New Mexico.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and you were on once before. It's I don't know if it was early on, and it was sometime during the COVID situation. And welcome back to the show. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself, and how I've come to interact with you. Of course, is through your writings, but you're a New Mexican here, and talk about your experience moving to New Mexico and how you broadly see the state.
Well, I've been here for a long time. I came here in December of 1978. I had practiced law in New York for a couple of years and got sick of living on the tundra of upstate New York, and came here primarily to practice law and also so I could golf 10 months a year, which I did. And practiced law here for it was 27 years here. Got sick in 2005 and then retired. Um, and Generally, I think the way I'd have to say, if you've seen some of my articles in American Thinker over the course of the last year, my outlook for New Mexico, unfortunately, is not very good. New Mexico has some great things going for it. Certainly, the weather is one. Um, but in terms of the politics and the way the state has been run for most of the last 90 years, there are some tremendous problems.
Yeah, and that's how we started to interact. As you this somehow became a regular contributor over at the website American Thinker. How did that website? It's broadly speaking a conservative oriented website. Who runs it? How did you get on their radar screen, and how did they get on your radar screen?
Well, all I did is that I would say one of the more popular conservative websites in the country, and I had read it for some time and simply submitted an article, and it was accepted for publication. It was simply that simple.
Okay.
The original article that I submitted was approximately a year ago, and I know at that time when I submitted that article, there was a suggestion that I might want to submit a second article regarding the congressional race up in Santa Fe. And I did do that also, but there have been no other suggestions for articles, and all the other articles have been my own.
So if somebody has something they really need to get off their chest, and they can write, which obviously you can. Uh, you could go to American Thinker and find out how to submit. And it's just AmericanThinker.com. Do you know who the proprietor there is? Who's behind it?
There's someone named I've never. I mean, all of the information is on the website. They're basically just three or four people, and the original person. And I honestly haven't looked at their biographies of sort of the main three or four people. And I think the main guy is his name. I think is Henry Lifson. I think it is.
Okay.
And again, I honestly don't remember all of the specifics of his biography, but all that information is available at the website.
Okay, so it's not somebody that everybody would know the name, but it is a well-trafficked website, and something that shows up in my Twitter feed, Facebook. Whenever you write something, people start sending it around, and it's not like I'm just sending it around. It's people see it and they respond to it, and obviously it's a pretty well-trafficked website. Now, we talked a little bit previously about a variety of economic issues. Now, um, let's just start with the U.S. Census data that just came out, which uh, basically the gist of it is, first and foremost, New Mexico is a slow-growing state. More people who are older are moving here. Fewer younger people are either moving here or staying here, and the ones that aren't having as many kids. Um, is this a surprise to you based on the articles that you've written? Do you think we can do anything to change this situation?
It's not, to me, it's not a surprise at all. In most parts of the country, population growth follows job growth. And essentially, my position is 90 years of single party Democrat rule has scared away private business from New Mexico. So the fact that New Mexico grew only, was it 2.8%?
2.8 overall.
Yeah, in comparison to the 5 surrounding states, I mean, just nothing. I believe all of the five surrounding states, other than Oklahoma, grew by at least double digits.
Right.
And so it simply doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, and you would certainly agree, or based on your writings in the in American Thinker, you would come to that understanding. Now, I think your perspective is generally shared by the Rio Grande Foundation in our approach to things. The legislature does not seem terribly interested in generating economic growth. If anything, they are, broadly speaking, more interested in figuring out ways to undermine the oil and gas industry here in the state. And you wrote an article on February 25th, or at least it was published on the 25th, 2021. Is this the dumbest state legislature in the country? So you pull no punches. Sometimes, we talk about at the Rio Grande Foundation specific legislative approaches to things. You just throw it out there. Is this the dumbest state legislature in the country? Now, yes or no? Did you answer your question?
I would say the jury is still out, and fortunately, I talked about a specific piece of legislation that would have banned fracking, I believe, on state lands in New Mexico. And to the best of my knowledge, that piece of legislation was never voted on.
This is true, yes.
So I would say, until there's a vote, the jury is still out.
Okay, so you think that is the critical kind of, that is the driving force. The other things that the legislature could or may do or has done, as they did in this last session, pale in comparison to that particular issue.
Yeah, I do. And of course, one of the positions I've had is my understanding that the New Mexico state legislature sits in session for a shorter amount of time than any other state legislature in the United States, and as a result has less time to do mischief.
I don't know if that's accurate or not. I know several states, including Texas, only meet every other year. Now, Texas has a rather substantial session when they do meet, but New Mexico's legislature is a part-time group of folks, and part-time, I mean they're not paid in a regular situation. They receive reimbursement for their activities, and that of course was made all the more unique by the virtual session. But I think the point remains, regardless of whether this one piece of legislation passes or not. And a lot of the things you kind of write about in your article, I mean, we are a state, like you just said. You can argue that other states may have better weather. I can't come to any conclusions on that. It really depends on your personal preferences, But we are definitely in the fastest growing quadrant of the entire country. All of the states around us are growing very quickly population-wise. All those states are beacons for jobs, low unemployment. They all happen to be at least somewhat more conservative, or they have remnant policies in place, thanks to ballot initiatives like Colorado does, that inherently restrict, and I'm talking about the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights. It's only New Mexico that has population growth that's more on par with Maine or Kentucky, some old slow growth state. So wouldn't you say that still makes them, if not among the worst legislatures in the country? We have all the advantages.
Sure, I'm not prepared to say that it's the worst because I don't know enough about how businesses run in other states. I know I was originally born in New York, which is now a dumpster state, and I lived in Illinois, which is also a dumpster state.
That's true.
I simply don't know enough about the other, because I've lived here such a long time, whether they are as awful as we are here in New Mexico.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I believe Illinois in that Census Bureau dump that report, Illinois actually lost population on net, which is no surprise because uh, people are fleeing that state now. Of course, Biden's helicopter money policies are going to further prop up their broken pension situation over there in Illinois. California is another state. So New York, Illinois, and California, I would say, are right up there. But New Mexico may be, you know, very close to those states. So, all right. So move on. Let's talk about COVID and your uh, efforts to get the vaccine. Now you're uh, on the older side. You're somebody who would require the vaccine, who would want the vaccine early on, and you had emailed me at some point during the post vaccine when the vaccine had been achieved and was being distributed that you had managed to get it, but you did not get it here in New Mexico. Tell us about that story.
Well, I had to drive 1,000 miles to get my 2 shots.
When? What time frame were we talking about?
March 1st.
Okay.
Round trip of 500 miles to Muleshoe, Texas.
Muleshoe.
Muleshoe, Texas.
Now, where is the thriving metropolitan area known as Muleshoe?
Muleshoe is you get to Clovis and you keep going.
Okay.
About another 20 miles. And when I looked on the map, that was close. Many New Mexicans who got shots in Texas went to Amarillo, but Muleshoe was a little bit closer, so that's where I went.
Okay. And New Mexico's been praised. I mean, for all the many governance flaws that you and I would point out about Michelle Lujan Grisham and the entire bureaucracy, we're known, national media and other data sets would indicate that we're one of the best states in the country under COVID for distributing the vaccine. What was your experience? Why did your experience differ from that?
Well, my experience in New Mexico, New Mexico is one of 2 states that had an age preference of 75. The only other state being Hawaii. 48 other states in the District of Columbia had lower age preference categories. The vast majority at 65 and 3 or 4 states at 70. I had registered for the vaccine when the website originally opened up, I believe in late December, and waited and waited and waited. And I'm over 65, under 75, and I simply was not contacted by the state. And I heard news reports that some people were driving to Texas and getting their shots, and considering the vulnerability, the danger if I were to contract the Wuhan virus, I decided I started investigating and discovered basically a state of Texas website that indicated all of the locations in Texas where the vaccine was available, the type of vaccine and the shot. I discovered that there was a pharmacy in Muleshoe, Texas that had the Pfizer vaccine, called them up, made an appointment, and drove over the next day.
Wow.
There's more. There's actually a little bit more to the story,
Sure.
and I don't want to digress too much. The Pfizer vaccine is recommended that you get the second shot within 3 weeks. So as that 3-week time period was getting close, it was approximately March 17th or March 18th. I contacted my health carrier here in Albuquerque and asked if there was any way that they could help me get my second a Pfizer shot in Albuquerque, so I didn't have to drive back to Texas. The healthcare carrier contacted the New Mexico Health Department, apparently spoke to a live person, and they said that, well, because I had in effect jumped the line, I would be placed at the end of the list, and that the earliest that I could get a Pfizer shot in New Mexico would be mid-April, which would be approximately 45 days. So as soon as I heard that, I simply went back to Texas a second time. I believe it was on March 22nd, and I was done. I did not notify the state of New Mexico that I got my second shot, just waiting to see if I would ever be contacted notified by the state until approximately April 5th, April 10th, that I could get a shot about a week to 10 days later.
Now, I'm not familiar enough with the state's COVID vaccine collection metrics, but I do know that from what I've heard, the state is looking to try to incorporate people like yourself into the vaccine data. Of course, now the latest, red, yellow, green, turquoise map does have a strong, vaccination rates or a strong variable in that map. Do you expect that you are included in that in any way, shape, or form, or do you suspect that you are kind of below the radar screen in terms of being a vaccinated New Mexican?
Oh, I know I'm included for at least one shot because I went to the website myself on March 2nd and notified the website that I had gotten my first shot.
Okay.
Yeah, so they know. I have not reported the second shot, but I did report the first shot on the website.
Oh, so if you are responsible, a responsible vaccine recipient, you can go to the state and tell them, I received this. Okay, that's good to know. And I guess folks out there that are listening that are vaccinated or want to get vaccinated, want to make sure that their poke counts for the reopening of our state, then please go and do that at the Department of Health website.
Correct.
So did you have any reactions to the vaccine?
I did. The first time I had the reaction, I had a sore back for almost a week. And I didn't realize I didn't even connect.
You sure that wasn't the 500-mile drive?
I didn't connect it, but I heard some other people talking on the radio that that's apparently a fairly typical response to the Pfizer. And I know I had to cancel hiking several days because my back just hurt too much.
Okay, well.
But the second shot, basically no response whatsoever, but the first shot was fairly significant.
Interesting. I don't know. I haven't pretended to account for all the different vaccines and their side effects potentially. Typically, what I've heard is that you expect the more profound reaction from the second vaccine than the first. But anyway, now while we're talking about the vaccine and COVID, you did write an article about New Mexico COVID insanity. That was pretty early on in the entire situation, and you like I did, like the Rio Grande Foundation, we kind of saw very early on that not just people but the state's reaction to COVID-19 was not. There's not a lot of science there. So talk about what you experienced, and especially when you experienced it, because I think that's a relevant factor.
If I understand the question, all that I can say, it's sort of a big question, is that I'm not aware of any statistical correlation between the harshness of a state's shutdown and deaths per million.
That would be one aspect, yeah, and harshness could be anywhere from businesses and schools being open to even mask mandates. There's been a very limited to trivial to non-existent relationship between the virus's spread and having the mask, of course, or have mask mandate, I should say.
The other sort of, and I may not be responding to your question, I think one of the things that there hasn't been sufficient discussion about in New Mexico is the fact that this important health decision in New Mexico, the state of New Mexico set up this command and control type structure where some bureaucrat at the Department of Health somewhere in New Mexico decides who is entitled to the shot. And I guess the question is, do we really want a system like that? I mean, in the past, these important health decisions have usually been made by the individual or the individual after consulting with his or her physician. And New Mexico certainly has almost, in my opinion, has been treating the citizens of the state like as children, deciding who, when you can get the shot, who will get the shot, when and where.
Which gets back to your prior comments about Texas and your experience in getting the vaccine over there as opposed to in New Mexico. Now, my understanding is that it's fairly easy to get the vaccine at this point in New Mexico. But you wrote an article about hiking in the Sandias back on July 18th, 2020, which is, definitely people were starting to get to understand the virus situation and how it spread, how it didn't spread. I think at that point, it was pretty safe to say that the virus did not spread easily through outdoor person-to-person contact, and you went hiking up in the Sandias. Talk about that.
Yeah, basically, I haven't read the article in a while, but essentially, I mean, we had these very severe uh, mask mandates and other rules in New Mexico. Unfortunately, those during the Trump presidency, those rules did not apply to federal land, and so that basically you could go hiking on federal land, which is all around Albuquerque, and you could be free. I mean, you could walk around without mask, and you could be normal.
Did Biden change that? I don't know.
Oh yes,
He
absolutely.
did that immediately?
Oh, about
Okay.
the first day he was in
Okay.
office. Oh yes.
Well, I can't say that I necessarily adhere extraordinarily closely to what our overlords attempt to tell us. Certainly, it's one thing to be in a big box store or in a grocery store and try to do your shopping without having a mask on. It's an entirely different ball of wax to be out in the great outdoors, hiking around in the mountains, and have very rarely are there other people around, let alone park rangers or anything. So it's yeah, and now of course, long after. I mean, you're talking about in July, where I think average people kind of had a pretty good grasp on this thing's not spreading. Certainly not in the broad outdoors. Maybe if you are close talking somebody outdoors, you might have a chance of picking it up, but it wasn't nearly the threat in an outdoor environment. You said that you were seeing people wearing masks and giving you sideways glances for not wearing a mask out in the mountains. Is I see people still to this day in downtown Albuquerque, where I work, doing the same thing. It's striking how lacking in scientific backing so much of what is happening in this situation is.
Yeah, I can tell you basically, I generally go hiking with friends, usually about twice a week this time of year. Unfortunately, mercifully, I see almost no one in the mountains of New Mexico wearing a mask anymore. On my daily walk, which I do sort of near Altura Park when I'm not hiking, um, uh, there are still a few people, but I believe that the CDC may have come out with some recommendations a couple of weeks ago that wearing masks outdoors was no longer necessary. New Mexico has probably not followed suit.
Yeah, the it's kind of a odd situation where outdoors it depends. I think that the state is a little more lenient on just people out walking around, although they haven't formally uh, pulled back on any of those mask mandates. I think it's just sufficient that people are ignoring them. But going to a baseball game, going to the Isotopes, for example, you're supposed to wear a mask the entire game unless you're eating or drinking, which of course you can massage the situation a little bit. But it's yeah, just because the science says that outdoors you're not going to get it. Even our governor, uh, in a outdoor environment when she was announcing the Intel expansion just a week or so ago, she was nowhere near anybody at a podium talking about this wonderful thing that happened, and she was wearing her mask while she was speaking, which is not only based on bad science, but I think it's bad. Uh, the vaccine is no longer desired by everybody who can get it, and it's bad messaging. It's a bad example that she's setting by essentially saying to people who are vaccine skeptical, doesn't matter if you get the vaccine, you still have to behave in this fearful way.
And all I can say, I just recently got back from a trip to Tennessee and to Florida, and I mean the difference between those states and New Mexico is just night and day. I mean, the states are just wide open. No one outdoors wears a mask. I went to a baseball game. It was Tampa Bay versus Oakland. In the stadium, you have to wear a mask until your seat, and that's it. Same in restaurants. You wear a mask until you get to your table, and then you just take it off. And generally, both states are just wide open.
And Tampa Bay is an indoor stadium, but still, I mean, the relevance of the indoor-outdoor distinction at that point, when you're talking about a 50,000 person stadium, is a little bit trivial. Now, Florida has been pretty widely reported as being a wide open state. In fact, the governor there, DeSantis, has been actively pushing back against local governments imposing limits. Now, what part of Tennessee did you travel to?
I was around Knoxville, which is eastern Tennessee, for about a week, and all I can say that part of the state was simply just wide open.
Okay, so not the big city Nashville, of course, which I don't know what Nashville's been like. I haven't been there. But Knoxville is a university town, so you do have some level of kind of that liberal mindset creeping in there.
And the only place in both states, and I was hiking in Great Smoky Mountain National Park for a couple of days. No one was wearing masks there. The only place in both states where I was sort of hassled was in some museums. They sort of like, for whatever reasons, in both places they demanded wearing masks all the time.
Okay.
Who knows?
Well, that's not entirely surprising. I think most museums tend to have some kind of role involving government funding, and governments of all types tend to be a little more restrictive in their approaches. So, not entirely a surprise there. Now, you wrote recently at American Thinker about space travel from New Mexico. You said, "Don't hold your breath." This is from October of 2000. October of 2010 is when the spaceport opened. Your article was from last summer, but the situation remains the same, and we cover the spaceport on a regular basis, such as it is now. Seeking Alpha, another kind of more conservative-oriented financial website, is tracking the stock price of Virgin Galactic with the expectation that it'll drop. Now, by and large, the stock market has been, to quote a song, walking on sunshine. It's just, and printed money, I might add. But how do you place the spaceport and its likelihood of doing anything in the not too distant future? What's your take on the spaceport?
Just a disaster, and I suspect I would suspect that Virgin will there's a fairly good chance of bankruptcy within the next 6 months. I think and I can't say.
You're talking about Branson's company. Unfortunately, the spaceport itself is owned by the government and cannot go bankrupt.
Yes, let me be more specific, but I think that Virgin Galactic, is just burning through cash. I haven't spent that much time looking at the balance sheet. I believe that the stock got up maybe up to 50, and I believe is now below 20. I know that there have been reports that insiders have been selling tremendous amounts of shares. So it's certainly, from the stock's point of view, valuation point of view, it's not looking very good. When you see insiders selling hundreds of thousands of shares, it's usually a bad sign.
Yeah, and of course, we're creeping up on 10 years, a full decade since that facility opened. I was one of many here around Albuquerque that saw lights in the sky that looked very unnatural. I don't know if you might have been. You doing a lot of hiking and walking around outside, it seems. I was walking my dogs through my neighborhood and looked up and thought it was a jet plane, and sure enough, it was Elon Musk's Starlink system, looking very radiant in the sky and moving very quickly. And just the night and day, the far distance between the other folks involved in private space and what's happening here in New Mexico, it's really not even close, unfortunately.
And so I think one of the questions I hope your listeners will think about, and everyone in New Mexico, I mean, I mean, when you talk about spaceport as well as a rail runner, I mean, how, looking back with 2020 hindsight, basically, how could the legislature have been so stupid? And certainly, single party political rule with no meaningful opposition certainly is a big factor.
Circle back to your, is this the dumbest state legislature in the country? And I might add that those two projects were created at a time when Bill Richardson, much more kind of business oriented, moderate Democrat governor than the one we have currently in office. And you've been here long enough to see both of them. Kind of corruption issues, to be sure, but Bill Richardson was not the true believer in government that Michelle Lujan Grisham is.
But had secret presidential ambitions.
Absolutely, yes. And I think that's the difference. And where Richardson cooked up some of these schemes that obviously have not worked out. The rail runner certainly is one of them. Now, we've got a few minutes left, and a lot of what we talk about here on the podcast and what we've talked about is depressing and or very serious. But you try to bring some levity to your writing on occasion, and you wrote a piece at the end of March 2021, New Mexico Breaks Bad. Now, one of the things that you do, and it's very difficult to do in writing about New Mexico for a national audience, is because so few people know anything. If you're writing about New York for a national audience, people know who Cuomo is. Same with Gavin Newsom in California. You could probably stop 100 people on the streets of any major city outside New Mexico, and maybe one of them would know who the governor of New Mexico is, if you're lucky. So you do dive into some of the characters of New Mexico here. So it's a little more New Mexico centric, but you have some fun with little pop culture and, of course, Breaking Bad. So talk a little bit about the article you wrote and what you're getting at there.
Well, it was not a very difficult 6-question exam, multiple choice, in which I wanted to test knowledge on Breaking Bad characters, Better Call Saul, and New Mexico politicians. And no one ever told me what the results were, but I suspect that most New Mexicans were able to do pretty well on the exam.
Yes, like question 1, which one of the following never pled guilty to a felony? Walter White, of course, of Breaking Bad fame. Manny Aragon, former Democrat president pro tem of the New Mexico Senate. Ken Schultz, former mayor of Albuquerque. And Toby Martinez, former Metropolitan Court administrator. Of course, he got tied up with Manny Aragon. And I have to admit that the only names that really rung a bell for me, and I've been in New Mexico for 15 years, of course, Walter White. I've watched all of Breaking Bad. And then Manny Aragon, who certainly loom large in New Mexico politics. But Ken Schultz and Toby Martinez, those are some throwbacks right there.
It was wonderful that actually that you can find links and excellent stories still on the local TV station websites, and so it was very helpful. And so I've got links, a lot of links. I had fun with the question as who is the most disliked woman in New Mexico,
and of course there are no right answers to some of these. The most disliked woman in New Mexico, Skylar White. That was Walter White's wife, who sometimes was not a very likable character. Of course, we're all sympathetic with Walter at the beginning of Breaking Bad because he comes down with cancer and is trying to figure out a way to pay for his medical procedures. Cheryl Williams Stapleton, she's actually a state rep. I caught a mistake. She's not a senator, she's a representative, but she's not a favorite. Ellen Bernstein, now the Albuquerque Federation of Teachers, certainly their success, if you will, in keeping New Mexico children out of school for so long was certainly something that led to my ire, and furthermore, my children no longer attending public school. And then Michelle Lujan Grisham, the governor. So you got some pretty strong contenders right there for most disliked woman in New Mexico. Well, we've just got a few minutes. Anything that I'm missing? Any other writing projects on the docket? You can go to American Thinker, by the way, and read all of Charles. Just put in the search bar Charles Sullivan, and all of his articles will come up.
Well, what you do is that you go to American Thinker, and then you go to Archives, and then you'll see the author section, and then you just go to that section alphabetically. I've written about 10 articles in the last year, and they're all there. And I guess the only other thing, hopefully, Paul, you might want to, and you've discussed it already, but I mean, I am of the opinion that with the horrible shutdown of the public schools, that it's very clear that the governor has chosen the teachers' unions over the students and their parents. And I would hope that will be a subject of discussion in the future.
I certainly agree with you there. And, again, I have 3 daughters, and 2 of them were in Albuquerque public schools when the shutdown came in March of 2020. We kind of cobbled things together for the rest of that school year. Certainly they, like every other child in New Mexico who lost that learning time, they didn't have a chance to make it back. Now, somewhere along summer, July of 2020, we looked and read the handwriting on the wall, if you will, and said, this situation is not going to be resolved by the time school begins in August. So we started to make accommodations for schooling our own children. And the children obviously have evolved not just 1 grade, but 2 grades since school let out in that fateful March of 2020. So we had a very successful homeschooling experience this year, and then this fall, 2 of the children will be at Catholic schools, and 1 will be at a charter school, which is still a taxpayer funded educational opportunity, but hopefully they're able to go back normally, preferably without masks, although the governor does not seem to be, you talked about the mask and the coronavirus insanity. Running a cross-country meet in a mask, I know you're more of a hiking kind of guy, but it just strikes me as complete insanity that they're expecting people to do that.
And wasn't there a high school race in which one of the runners collapsed at the finish line? I think
there was here in New Mexico. It was a kid from Rio Rancho. There's been other cases of that from around the country that have happened, and yeah, it's a very troubling issue, and something that while children, I guess this week they announced that 15 and 16-year-olds can get it, and whether they should or shouldn't, that's an open question. You have no problem with the vaccine as it exists, though. It was never a thought that you were going to not get it. Or you're not concerned at all about repercussions from the vaccine.
Oh, I absolutely.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, basically, I'm, because again, of my age group, I am very, very vulnerable. So there was no question that I was going to get it as soon as I could. But I mean, when you look at the mortality statistics for young people, I agree with people who are very, very reluctant to have young people agree to the vaccine. This is not the traditional vaccine. This is something brand new we're messing like with DNA. And so I totally I think that caution is certainly warranted for younger people getting the vaccine.
Well, that is a very realistic approach. I think it shows that you, at very least, understand statistics, which shines through in your writing there at American Thinker. And it's not that you're certainly ideologically on the right side of the political spectrum, but just because that is the case doesn't mean you're not practical in your approach to very, you know, specific things like the COVID virus and the vaccine. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate your perspective. And again, AmericanThinker.com. Charles Sullivan is the name, and we appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to this show at Apple, Stitcher, or have your Google Home play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.